Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And today, yesterday's video, when we went through the dev blog that Wargaming released talking about the current situation with submarines and their response to a lot of frequently asked questions about submarines, it was pretty clear there in the comments section a vast majority of players are still very confused on exactly how submarines work in today's World of Warships. This is quite reasonable as they've been through several years and dozens of iterations of submarines. So in today's video, we are going to go over how submarines work in today's World of Warships, and also what information you need to know to best counter submarines, and a couple of tips and tricks on how to do that in order to make that submarine player go down to the bottom of the ocean and stay there. So let's go ahead and get right on into it, and I am referencing the recent article that Wargaming released going over exactly the same information. This is the most up-to-date information on how submarines work and how the mechanics work in-game. And this is not changing for, according to Wargaming, at least 2 patches. So all the information in here should be solid and should be pretty similar going forward, even if you come across this video, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months from now. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive on in going over the basics. So, submarines are primarily armed with torpedoes, and this is what the vast majority of submarines are going to be using to do damage. Now, there are 2 types of torpedoes in the game. We have acoustic homing torpedoes, and then the, as they call, alternative torpedoes, or unguided torpedoes, that are available from tiers 8 and tier 10. The way acoustic torpedoes work is that they home in on a target. To mark a target for homing, you have to hit the target with sonar pings. Doing so highlights a sector on the ship that the torpedoes will home in on. But the enemy ship that you've pinged also sees this effect as well. They also see the sonar ping coming toward them and an indicator that pops up in a general area around you when you do ping. Once the ping has been active, the torpedoes will home in on that target for a certain duration of time. So when you hit the ship with this ping, it activates the torpedoes homing. You can hit this ping again for an enhanced homing effect, which will give the torpedoes more aggressive homing, and if you have the commander skill, do additional damage to the target. Now, if you are on the receiving end of this, you can nullify the ping effect using the damage control party. However, the torpedoes will still home in on the last known location of the of the ping. So, a good general tip is that damage con needs to be held until you see the torpedoes, until they are about to hit, especially depending upon what type of damage con you have. If you have something like a battleship's damage con, which is active for anywhere from 16 to 20 seconds if you have the American battleships, then you can probably pop those once you see the torpedoes, and you'll prevent any further homing from getting set on your ship. Once you use your damage con and it runs out, the submarine can ping you again, and the torpedoes will resume their homing. So if you have something with a shorter damage con time, like a cruiser or a destroyer, you need to hold that until just before the torpedoes home in and hit your ship. Pop it, turn hard, in order to escape the torpedoes. Now, do remember the torpedoes will keep homing in on the last known location of that ping, so you do need to make some evasive maneuvers even after popping damage con. Now, as well, the torpedoes stop homing in at different ranges depending upon the class. Battleships, the torpedoes stop homing in around 2 kilometers. Cruisers, around 1.5 to 1.7 kilometers. Destroyers are much closer at around 1 kilometer, and when you have a double ping on a destroyer, the torpedoes really want to get that destroyer. So, yes, if you're a destroyer and you're being pinged by a submarine, you need to be very aware of your surroundings and be on the lookout for those torpedoes. The unguided torpedoes work just like every other set of torpedoes in the game. The submarine player has to lead the target appropriately, make the proper guesstimations on how the enemy ship is going to maneuver, and fire the torpedoes. Once the unguided torpedoes have been fired, there's no way to direct them. Even at submerged depth, the unguided torpedoes will not elevate. Even if you do ping the enemy ship, they just keep going straight ahead. They are completely dumbfired torpedoes. The unguided torpedoes also do more damage than the homing torpedoes. Some tips for dealing with these torpedo types, starting off with the acoustic ones like I mentioned. You need to hold your damage con, especially if you are in a cruiser or a destroyer, until just before the torpedoes hit. I'd say roughly 1.5 kilometers away from your ship. If they're still homing in or they got the double ping and they're homing in hard, pop it then, turn hard over out of the torpedoes, and let them miss you. If you're in a battleship, generally if you're paying enough attention, you can dodge the torpedoes without using damage con. If you play with your accelerator and rudder appropriately and try to trick the torpedoes, because again, with battleships they stop homing around 2 kilometers. You hit the brakes really hard once they hit that 2 kilometer mark, or you turn out of them really hard or turn into them if the angle is appropriate, and try to decrease that distance as fast as you can to where they just zip on by your ship. You can generally do that quite regularly. However, of course, given the situation in game, you might not be in the best position ever to maneuver your ship, then yes, use damage con and then turn away from the torpedoes. The alternative torpedoes, or the unguided torpedoes, same tips apply as if you were being stalked by a torpedo destroyer. If you're out and about by yourself, you're still being spotted, there's no one spotted around you, that means there's either a submarine or a torpedo DD stalking you, which means you need to go ahead and start doing some evasive maneuvers. Turn hard left, sail that way for a little bit, turn hard right, play with your throttle, decrease it, drop it down to 3/4 speed, increase it to maximum speed, drop it down to 1/4 speed. Just be unpredictable as possible with your ship, and those unguided torpedoes will zip right on by you, probably not even detected by you if you throw them off enough. Now, some submarines do have bow and stern torpedoes. That's just something you're going to have to memorize with the game. Most of the American submarines do have bow and stern torpedoes. All the German ones, except for U-2501, have bow and stern torpedoes, and the I-56 only has bow torpedoes. So just know that even if they are faced away from you, some submarines can still launch some torpedoes out of their stern. Now, submarine detectability. This is a big one that's been messed with a lot. So, with the detection of submarines, this is how it generally works. At the surface, submarines have their full detection ring, meaning that their maximum detection is their maximum detection. Once they go to periscope depth, however, their detection is now roughly that of their spotted by air, which is about 2.5 kilometers from most submarines, which means that they can still spot you, but you probably aren't going to be able to see them unless you stumble upon them. When they're at periscope depth, they can only be detected by visual spotting or by hydroacoustic search. Radar cannot spot them when they're at periscope depth. When they're at periscope depth too, they can pretty much move at full speed, maybe 1 or 2 knots down, which means that most of these submarines can still move around 28, 27 knots when you get to the higher tier ships at top speed. Again, depending upon what ships, it'll be a couple of knots less than their top speed. But then once they're completely submerged, they can only be detected by other submarines using the submarine surveillance consumable or surface ships using a hydroacoustic search. However, that's only within a 2-kilometer radius. Submarines, once they are below the surface, once they're below periscope depth, they cannot detect enemy ships at all, even through proximity spotting. And they can only see spotted targets within a very limited range, about 8 to 10 kilometers on average. Again, some submarines is a little bit more, some submarines is a little bit less, but they cannot spot anything once they are submerged, except for other submarines using the submarine surveillance consumable. They can, however, get an idea of where the enemy ships are at if they use their hydro consumable. They get an outline of the ship every couple of seconds, so do know that they can see that. So even though they're submerged, they can still get a general idea of where you're at, but it's only updated for a few seconds, and this consumable only runs for a very short time. Now, when they are submerged, if they are pinging, a hydrophone effect will appear above their ship, even if they're at the surface, at maximum depth, or at periscope depth. You will also see the ping travel across the top of the waterline. So this means that you can follow the ping back to roughly where the submarine's at, and then you'll have the hydrophone effect in a general-ish area of where the submarine is at. And this is how you have to track down the submarine until you hit it. Now, once you see this hydrophone effect, you need to pay attention to where it's moving. You can kind of get an idea of what general direction the submarine is traveling in, as of course the hydrophone effect will follow the submarine around, same with the ping. If you have ASW planes, what I suggest you do is drop the first charge in a general-ish area of where you think the submarine is going. Once you hit them with the depth charge, no matter if it's a glancing blow or a direct hit, the submarine will start to leak oil. Now, submarines have the fast damage con cooldown effect, meaning that their damage con is active for a very short time, but it has a quick cooldown time. However, the damage cons are also limited in their usage, so they only get so many of them. In most submarines, they'll probably damage con the first oil leak for sure. This is when you wait for that first flight to come back up again, drop it again on the submarine, and get them leaking oil again. By this time, they've definitely used their damage con in most cases, which means the oil effect will stay on the submarine for quite some time. This is when you bring up your second flight of ASW planes and start to drop that on the submarine. This will net you some good solid damage. Again, depending upon the skill level of the submarine player, this may or may not work tremendously well, but it's the most effective way so far that I've been able to tell of doing damage to submarines. Now, if you're in a ship that doesn't have ASW, you do have to sell over them to drop your depth charges. However, you do generally drop way more depth charges in this fashion than you do with the ASW plane, so you wind up doing more damage to submarines. Speaking of depth charges do different amounts to submarines based upon a couple of factors. The first one is how deep the submarine is. The submarine is right at the surface or at periscope depth. Depth charges, direct hits from depth charges, do quite a bit of damage to submarines. If the submarine is at operational depth or maximum depth, the damage is reduced. Of course, too, depending on how close you are with your depth charges, that also affects the amount of damage that you do to submarines. Direct hits will do way more damage than indirect hits, which are bracketing the submarine on either side of the submarine. So ideally, of course, you want to pay attention to those ribbons, see if you're getting direct hits or indirect hits, and then fine-tune your aim accordingly. Obviously, the more direct hits you get on the submarine, the closer you are to the submarine. So use those ribbons to kind of guide you with your aiming, along with the oil slicks and the hydrophone effects and the sonar ping effects as well. Another popular strategy with some submarines is the shotgun maneuver. This is where a submarine finds a target that has been singled out from the rest of the pack. They switch over to their unguided torpedoes. They attempt to attack this ship at point-blank range. If this catches you completely off guard, there's honestly not a whole lot you can do about it, as these submarines are releasing their torpedoes at 1 or 2 kilometers away from your ship, and even the fastest of ships will struggle to try and get out of that situation. However, if you're paying attention to your surroundings, again, like we've talked about, and you're staying on the move, you're not ignoring the fact that you're being spotted by an undetected target, you can mitigate the damage from this attack a great deal. Now, do keep in mind that submarines, again, at periscope depth and on the surface, they're fairly quick, about as quick as that tier's cruisers in most cases. But once they dive down, they get hit with a major speed debuff. Most submarines will struggle to hit anywhere from 17 to 16 kilometers. Now, of course, if you got someone that's building into that speed, that can be increased a little bit, but it's still going to be quite slow for their tier. So this means as long as you're on the move, paying attention to your surroundings, you can mitigate the damage quite easily. In instance here, in attacking this Des Moines, I managed to catch him off guard for the first salvo. He sails away from me, he's got hydro going, starts to drop his ASW aircraft on me, and also fires on me when I surfaced up next to him to get my torpedoes off. He starts to sail away from my ship. At this point, when I'm underneath the surface, only about 13 kilometers, I'm only going about 13 knots. The Des Moines can go, of course, 30 or so knots. So as long as he's sailing away from me, he has the advantage. He obviously has the speed advantage, increasing the distance. Once I go submerged, I can't see him anymore. And again, firing the unguided torpedoes, I have to be at periscope depth or on the surface to get these torpedoes off to where they actually hit his ship. If I launch them from beneath periscope depth, the torpedoes will not be able to hit his ship. They'll be too deep. Now, of course, too, if you turn back into the submarine that's just attempt to shotgun you, then yes, you're probably going to get hit. But sailing away from them is the best strategy that you can utilize. Now again, obviously if they catch you sitting on an island or they catch you very still, it's not going to work that well. Some general tips too, encountering submarines: make sure you have a friend with you. If you have a friend, it makes the job much harder for the submarines. Submarines prey on ships that go out by themselves. That is who they want to go after. If you stick with the pack, find a buddy, makes the submarine's job a hell of a lot harder to sneak through all of you and get their torpedoes off. And like I'm sure many of you have seen, when the submarine is spotted, or it is pretty clear where they're at, everyone's dogpiling them with their ASW, which will lead to a very quick submarine death. So guys, this is the general facts and mechanics that you need to know about submarines in order to best defend yourselves from them. Take this information into game, put it to use, sink those submarines, send them right back down to the bottom of the ocean where they belong. In the comments down below, let me know anything that I might have forgot to mention in this video and any other helpful tips or tricks that you've been able to use in game to counter submarines as well. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 40,000 subscribers, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. Hope you all have a wonderful day, have a wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.